Hello everyone, my name is Sarah Harbison. I'm America's college counselor. It's good to see you. I missed having a Facebook Live last month, so I'm really excited to be back here. I'm going to be answering all of your questions about college admissions, or as many as I can get to in the coming few minutes, an hour. And here's the thing about admissions. It is changing every single day. Every day I post stories to my Instagram account, to my story. You can follow along about how colleges are impacted by COVID, but also I'm constantly giving you advice about the whole process, whether you are a 9th grader, 10th grader, 11th grader, or a rising high school senior. So the way that this works, if you are new to my rapid fire Q&As, you can ask your question in the comments section below the live feed. And we are streaming live on both of my Facebook pages for Sarah Harbison and Admissions Revolution. We save all of my Facebook Lives. I've been doing them for years, so you can go back and watch as many as you want. You can binge watch. But in the meantime, I see those questions. They're already coming in. I really appreciate it. I should mention also, if you want to give me a shout out, let me know where you're coming from. It's always so interesting to see what parts of the country, what parts of the world are tuning in. Let me know if you are a parent, a student, and feel free to ask those questions. So the first one is, are there schools that give merit for SAT but not ACT or vice versa? So here's the thing about colleges. They have absolutely no preferences when it comes to these standardized tests. They will accept the SAT or the ACT, and they are viewed equally. So that is the case for the admissions process. It's also the case for any merit scholarships. So you should feel free to take the test that is better suited to you. All right, next question. If your child participated in a sport all 4 years but was captain for only one, how do you make that clear? Great question. So I just got off a Zoom call with Application Nation class of 2021, and we talked about filling in these activities on the application. If you've had a role that is only for senior year, and usually senior year you have your biggest role, I would list that in the position line. You are also going to have to indicate what grade levels you've been participating in that activity for each listing. It's not how many grade levels you've had that particular leadership role, it's the grade levels that you've participated in that activity altogether. So let's say you play that sport, but you're captain of the sport senior year, but you were not, you were just a member of the team for freshman, sophomore, and junior. You would mark off 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th in the participation grade levels, but at the top, that position line, it's almost like the first line of on your resume for an experience that you've had. You want to list that position very clear, especially if it is a leadership role. Next question. Should kids with ADD indicate this on their application? So I've written about this. I talk publicly about this. It's surprising that it's 2020 and there is still a lot of discrimination that goes on in the admissions process, including discrimination against students who have learning differences, learning disabilities, and other issues. So it's my belief that that is personal information and you really do not have to share that anywhere in your application. There are students who have overcome incredible odds, and that turns out to be their college essay. That's okay to do as long as your transcript is absolutely wonderful and that there are going to be no concerns whatsoever. But generally speaking, I encourage students to leave that out of the application process. And that means from the college counselor's perspective, the teachers that are writing for you, and anything notated on a transcript. I was looking over a transcript of a student earlier in the day, and the student gets academic support and it's actually listed on their transcript. That is so not appropriate. So your high school should not be listing that on the application. That is private information, and I would prefer that you not include that in your application, and it shouldn't be included on your transcript, in my opinion. What are the 3 top biggest mistakes made on college applications? Okay, I feel like I could spend the entire day talking about 3 mistakes. Okay, Number one, I would say that students are afraid to self-identify because they hear that there's still racial discrimination in the admissions process. But I would encourage you to self-identify no matter what it is, whether you are coming from an overrepresented background or an underrepresented background. It's really important to set the record straight, to make it clear what your background is so that admissions officers are not making assumptions that are incorrect, but you also are making it clear who you are. The other reason that I encourage students to self-identify is if you have been discriminated in the admissions process because of your race and you don't self-identify, you don't have a leg to stand on. So that's number one. Number two, I would say, and I'm just thinking of the Zoom call I just finished, when it comes to the activities list, that students are just filling it out. They're not thinking through it in advance. You want to think about what activities you share, especially if you have more than 10 and you're filling out the common application. It only fits 10. So you want to be thoughtful about which activities you include. You'd also want to describe your activities and the roles that you've had in different ways, especially if you are a non-traditional leader and you have a lot of impact with the things that you do. But most students just fill out the application and they don't think carefully enough about telling a story in that activities list. And I would say the third biggest mistake has to do with the main essay, that students will pick something very obvious about themselves and write about it because it's easy. It's kind of an easy go-to. But when it comes to your topic for your main essay, admissions officers want to learn something really new and fresh about you. So I always encourage students to write their main college essay about something that's not going to appear on their college application. Okay, all right. If my daughter still plans to take the SAT and see how she scores, should she say on the Common App that she wants them considered or that she plans to submit them just in case she submits Common App before getting scores back? Okay, so this is a really good question. There are a lot of rising seniors that have registered for an upcoming SAT or ACT. When they're filling out, let's say, Common App, there's a question in the testing section that asks if they're planning to take another test. If you answer yes, that gives the admissions officers who are reading your application a sense that there will be scores coming and they're going to be waiting for them. Now, in this COVID world that we live in right now, the reality is that a student, even if they want to take a test and they're registered for it, they might not be able to take it. So I would answer no, that they're not intending to take any more tests. And they can even apply test optional if the college is test optional this year if they don't have any scores. If they're able to get that test done because of where they live, because they just got lucky, great. They can send those scores when they receive them, and if they're happy with them, they can share those scores, those new scores, with the college or university. Even if you apply test optional, even if you said that you are not going to be taking these tests again, if you send those scores and they're really good and they can strengthen your application, the admissions officers would love to have them. And that's the thing. There are going to be things that come in after the deadline. It could be SAT or ACT scores. It could be your teacher's recommendation letter. For the most part, that's okay. And in this landscape, with so many delays, I think colleges are going to be a lot more understanding about those deadlines, including when a student sends test scores after the deadline. Next question. I read that 20% of Harvard's entering class is deferring. Is that high deferral rate widespread? And what is the impact on the class of 2021? I have to say, this question is being asked to me every single Friday afternoon when I do an Instagram Live. There have been a number of stories that have come out about Harvard, for example, deferring or granting a gap year request for about 20% of their incoming freshmen. There was an article this week that I posted on my Instagram story about Princeton granting every single gap year request that came in for them for incoming freshmen. I have to say that Harvard in general has always been the gap year college. If you wanted to take a gap year 30 years ago, they were very supportive of it, and they've always been supportive of it. This year is unusual. We're seeing a lot more incoming freshmen and even some upperclassmen deciding to take a year off. Harvard's probably going to be the big leader in all of this, and I think Princeton is not far behind. but most of these colleges, they have to have as close of a freshman class on target as possible. So a lot of colleges, even though things were changing, they had to put certain deadlines on those gap year requests. They had to put some limits on them as well. Because if they bring in only 80% of their class, they're not going to be able to pay their bills. These colleges run like businesses, so they have to be careful. So do I think it's widespread? No, I think Harvard's going to be at the top of that list of the percentage of incoming freshmen that were granted a gap year request. I don't think most colleges have that high of a percentage. Here's the thing though, so a lot of students are worried about how these students who are deferring their admission for a year, how that's going to affect the class of 2021. I really believe even though we have more students taking a gap year and they will be folded into the next class with those current high school seniors in terms of filling up spaces in the next class, I believe that we're going to see smaller applicant pools across the board, number one, which means that the acceptance rate will have to rise because of that, and a lot of uncertainty among these colleges. If they don't have an early decision policy, they're relying on early action and regular decision, and those students who they admit may or may not enroll. So you're going to find that you're going to see smaller applicant pools this coming year, and you're going to see higher acceptance rates, not only because of the smaller applicant pools, but because colleges are going to probably have to admit more students than they normally do to be able to bring in the class at the same number as previous years. Next question. A lot of schools, at least in my area, are switching to having classes for only half of the year, while colleges view grades in these classes differently. So every school is kind of handling this differently. There are going to be, I've heard from some rising high school seniors where they're able to take all of their required classes for graduation in the fall semester, and they will graduate early or be able to do something else in the spring. Whatever works for you, whatever works for your school or your school district, these colleges are going to be very understanding. I would say that if you're planning to graduate early, like a semester early, or fulfill all the requirements for graduation, what I would do is when you're filling out your courses for senior year on the application, a lot of times you get to list first semester and then second semester. For second semester, I would definitely have a good plan in place about what you plan to do. You don't want to graduate early or finish everything and not have anything to do during that spring semester. So colleges really like to see that you're being productive with your time, both your free time, but also if you're planning to finish things up a little bit early. How can you establish a relationship with an admissions officer without looking like a brown noser or looking stupid? You have to be super careful. If you are considering highly selective universities or colleges, you're going to have a very hard time actually finding contact information on your admissions officer, and that's because they like to hide it. That's because they don't want prospective students reaching out to these admissions officers at all or on a regular basis. But if you are looking at colleges with higher acceptance rates, they might be a lot more welcoming to your emails or reaching out to them. You really have to make a decision based on your colleges. But generally speaking, if you're looking at highly selected colleges, those admissions officers, they're meeting you very, very quickly. If they're meeting you at your school or in a virtual presentation, and they don't always remember how many times you've emailed them, or if you've emailed them too much, sometimes they remember that. So you want to be careful. You want your application to stand on its own. If there's an interview with an admissions officer, that becomes a part of your application. But reaching out to them to ask them questions to show your interest, you have to be careful with that. There are going to be some colleges that really like that. Those are colleges that track demonstrated interest. But for the more selective ones, you want to be careful. Hi, parent from Maryland. The colleges on my rising seniors list are all test optional. Awesome. Thus far, all of their test dates have been canceled. I'm wondering whether to direct their energies elsewhere, but I'm not sure how a lack of scores will impact scholarships merit. Okay, so there are a lot of students who have tried every possible test date. They register, they prepare for the test, and then they find out sometimes even the day of the test that it is not happening. At some point, you can only do that so many times before you are impacted by that. Your psyche, your confidence, you're preparing for these tests, you're showing up on test date and realizing you're not able to take the test. So if the student is extremely strong, their record is extremely strong, and everything else in their application is really strong, I would say don't waste your time prepping for these tests if all the colleges on your list are test optional. You will not be the minority. You will be the majority. And applying to a test optional college without test scores is not going to disadvantage you. It just means that the other pieces of your application are going to be weighed more heavily. So obviously, again, those students who have stronger records, who have a stronger extracurricular activities list, stronger recommendation letters, stronger essays, they're going to stand out more in the applicant pool. But I think there are going to be a lot of colleges, even the ones with merit scholarships, that are going to have to admit plenty of students without scores, and in fact also give merit scholarships to students who have strong records but no scores. That is what we're dealing with this year for the 2020-2021 school year. How do you ask a teacher for a good recommendation letter? I've got, a lot of tips about this. So I would say the best time to ask a teacher for a recommendation letter is actually in the spring of junior year. Whether you go to a private high school or a public high school, that is the best time. The best teachers to ask are usually junior year teachers, but sometimes sophomore year teachers can be asked depending on the colleges that you're applying to. You want to be asking teachers not only who have given you strong grades or grades that you've deserved that are strong, but also teachers that you have that you know and they know you and you've had conversations with them in and out of class. So for all those freshmen, sophomores, and juniors who are about to start the school year, think about that as you start the year. Think about getting some practice, especially if you are a freshman, with building a connection with the teacher, not just going to the teacher because you want a higher grade on a paper, but going to that teacher to talk about what you want to do next summer or what you want to major in, or you want to further a conversation about something that you learned in class. That is building up that connection and that relationship between the teacher and the student, and that can definitely help if you're planning to ask that teacher down the road. I also think that meeting with them at this point, probably not face-to-face, maybe virtually over Zoom, for example, is a good way to go about asking them. That way you can talk about why you're asking the teacher. You can talk about the colleges on your list. You can talk about the major you're interested in. You can have a really great conversation. And then my last tip before I answer another question is, after you have that conversation with the teacher, you can thank them over email, and you can reiterate some of the really big points that you want them to hone in on in their letter. So you can say something like, thank you so much for agreeing to write my letter of recommendation. As I mentioned, when we did that project in AP US History, it was really the highlight of my year. That specific project represents what I want to study in college. So you can mention little things that you've discussed with them in that conversation and reiterate them in an email and writing. So when they're ready to write your letter of recommendation, whether it happens in the summertime or the fall of your senior year, they have something in writing that they can go to. Next question, is it okay to list 2 to 3 independent hobbies on the activities list? My daughter spends several hours a week doing each hobby. One is playing an instrument that is not widely known. Absolutely. So independent hobbies are just as powerful as playing a sport, doing a club at school, doing community service. One activity type is not more important than the next. So if you have a bunch of independent hobbies, you can absolutely list them. And that can really show your personality, your individuality, your distinctiveness. So absolutely go for it. Next question. If it's not specified in Common App, who qualifies as other recommender? Could it be a second teacher, coach, or flight instructor? Yeah, it can be. So some colleges will allow a student to submit an optional extra letter of recommendation. If you're applying to more selective colleges, the letters of recommendation that really matter are going to be the letter that comes from your college counselor of record. So even if I know you really well, I'm not your college counselor of record, you have to communicate with your college counselor so that they know you well enough. That's usually one letter of recommendation. And then the other required ones are usually teachers, and they should come from academic subject matters. Teachers that taught you an academic subject matter, a core subject matter, usually in 10th or 11th grade, sometimes senior year teachers. But if you're applying early decision or early action, that teacher isn't going to really know you very well to be able to write that letter. But other recommenders could be a coach, could be your employer, could be a mentor, could be your priest or rabbi. What I will say is that those don't carry the same weight as the letters of recommendation that come from your college counselor or teacher. Be aware that admissions officers are reading a lot of applications a day. Let's say they are required to read 100 applications a day, and each application has 3 recommendation letters that are required, 1 from the college counselor and 2 from teachers. Just imagine how many letters of recommendation they're going to be reading. That's a lot. And so you don't want to overload them with recommendation letters or anything extra that's not required, that's not really, really important. So I'd be thoughtful and judicious about that. For a 3.5 GPA student, is it worth driving to another state to take the SAT, hoping for a 1350? So I always tell families when they give me the GPA, I actually have to see the transcript to know for sure. It depends on the grading scale. You know, what is the 3.5 on? Is it on a 4.0 scale? Is it on a 5.0 scale? Is it on a 3.6 GPA scale? It really depends on the scale, and I really need to see the transcript to know. I would say though that, you know, it needs to be a personal decision. And I would say that parents need to weigh in here. If you are driving 5 or 6 hours to get to a testing site, how is that going to affect you on test day? Does that mean that you have to get up at 1 in the morning and travel, or 3 in the morning? Does it mean that you have to stay overnight in a hotel that's close by the testing site? It really can affect the student. And also, usually these students are taking SAT and ACTs at their high school, their home high school, and they know where everything is and they're comfortable with the surroundings. If you throw a student in a brand new school 5 or 6 hours away, that can affect their confidence. So it's my belief that students should not feel the need to be traveling several hours or in another state just to be able to take a test. And I think at this point, most colleges are test optional. And I would just say, you know, make sure you highlight the strengths that you have. Don't highlight the limitations that you have, and make sure that the colleges on your list are going to value those strengths in your application. What if your school counselor you've had for the last year left over the summer, and now we're waiting to find his replacement from the school? How are they going to be able to write anything meaningful when they don't even know me? Oh my gosh, I know what you mean. I know exactly what you mean. It's interesting, this happens a lot. There's a lot of turnover in schools, especially this year. So if you have a brand new college counselor, maybe that college counselor hasn't even been hired yet and school's starting next week. Maybe that college counselor has no idea who you are. Just remember that the letter of recommendation that comes from the college counselor, they're not expecting, the admissions officers aren't expecting a whole lot from that letter, especially if you go to a large public high school where the college counselor has a lot of students that they're responsible for. There's also a question on the form that the college counselor fills out. They have to indicate how long they've known the student. So if they indicate that they've only known the student for 1 month before filling out that form, that is going to be assigned to the admissions officer not to expect a lot much from that letter, because how on earth could that college counselor know the student really, really well? So I wouldn't worry so much about the college counselor, but it will, the college counselor's letter, if they don't know you very well, but it does put more weight on those letters of recommendation that are coming from your academic teachers. So make sure you're communicating with them, keeping them up to date about your college list and anything new that's happening. Next question, does it look bad to not have 10 activities? No. Quality over quantity. I was working with one of my students a couple of weeks ago, and he has this phenomenal activities list, but he only had 8. And he said, Sarah, I don't have any more. I said, that's okay. If they are powerful, if the time commitment is considerable, if they've been doing that activities for a long time, from 9th grade on, if they've had a lot of impact, that's what's going to matter. So don't worry about filling it all up. It's not about filling it up or even giving some overflow of activities in another section. It's about the quality of the activities that you are going to be representing on your list. Great question. How do you list hours for a spring sport that was canceled in mid-March but would have ended in late May? So we just covered a very similar question in Application Nation Class of 2021 Zoom call about an hour ago. So if the student participated in that sport before this past spring, so let's say they were a junior this spring, and they did that sport in the spring of freshman year, the spring of sophomore year, and they would have wanted to do it spring of junior year, but everything got canceled. I'm recommending that students still check off the box for 11th grade. And if they're hoping to play that sport next spring, their senior year, they can check off that box as well. Because of COVID, everything has been turned upside down. However, I still want students to get credit for an activity that they would have done if COVID didn't happen. Next question. Do you think it might be a possibility come spring of 2021 or the summer to do college visits? My rising senior has only seen 3 locally, but none of which are on her current list. Perhaps she will go to a school sight unseen. It's really hard to predict what's going to happen in the spring, especially for those rising high school seniors. A lot of them, like your daughter, have not been able to visit the colleges on their list. So they are applying to these colleges without stepping foot on campus. My hope is that by springtime, after they've been admitted to all their colleges, that in the month of March and April, these colleges will be able to offer on-campus programs for admitted students, because it's really, really hard to make a decision about a college with sight unseen. Here are some other things to think about. There are some colleges that are allowing families to come on campus. Some colleges are offering on-campus tours and information sessions, social distancing, of course. There are some places, if they're within driving distance, that you can do a drive-by visit. And I would say almost every college in this country now offers a virtual tour and sometimes even a virtual presentation or information session on their website. It's not ideal to put a college on a list or go to a college without visiting. However, there are students who do that. In fact, a lot of the international students who apply to attend college in the U.S. apply and attend sight unseen. And even families within, that are parents from my generation and the generation before that, there were a lot of students applying to college without actually visiting. So we know that's not ideal, but there are some ways to get a feel for the college. Check out their websites, check out other platforms that are offering reviews. I like to look at unigo.com because it is just the students' voices, current students commenting about different things about their college or university. So check that out as well. And I saw a parent on the Application Nation discussion board say, definitely check out YouTube videos, the ones that are not necessarily sponsored by the college or the admissions office, because sometimes there are some interesting videos out there of students going around campus and doing their kind of unofficial tour as well. All right, a couple more questions. Is listing International History Olympiad Nationals for Quiz Bowl being canceled in the COVID section okay? It is. If you made it to the national competition of anything, I would probably recommend, and it got canceled in the spring, I would probably recommend that you list that in the COVID-19 section of Common App. So I'm recommending students do that for anything canceled that was a really, 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 really big deal, like a national competition, or something that they had planned to do this summer that they've never done before. Maybe it was an internship this summer leading up to senior year. If they weren't able to do that internship, they could also list that in the COVID-19 section. I know a couple of families have asked, well, what about students who've done some really cool things during COVID? Maybe they've made face masks or delivered meals for the elderly. If it's positive and meaningful and they were able to do it, to me, that garners that's a good reason for that student to list it as an activity on their activities list. All right, one more question. What do you think about applying early action to Yale or Harvard, as my daughter's dream school is Harvard and she knows it's a crapshoot to get in? And since 20% of the class deferred, so was wondering, what is your advice for early action versus regular? So for the most part, if a college has an early action program and a regular decision program, especially the more selective schools like Harvard and Stanford and MIT, you will find that the acceptance rate between early action and regular is pretty close, is pretty similar. But usually you will see, if you're able to get your hands on it, and you usually can't, but if we had some inside knowledge, you would learn that the early action acceptance rate at most of those elite colleges is, even if they have early action, is going to be higher in that early action round. But it's a little bit misleading because there are a lot of legacy students applying in the early action round. There are a lot of recruited athletes that are applying in the early action round, which can increase that acceptance rate. I think this year is going to be a little bit different, and I think you have to do what feels right. Even though early action is not binding, and those colleges will say it doesn't need to be your first choice, the student applying to Harvard early action is usually making a clear statement that it is their first choice. Just be aware that Harvard's early action program is restrictive early action. So that means that you can't apply to an early decision school, and you can't apply to private colleges that have early action programs. You're only permitted to apply to early action programs at public institutions. So if you apply restrictive early action to Harvard, you could apply early action to the University of Michigan, University of Virginia, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, because those are public universities with an early action program, but you wouldn't be able to apply early action to Northeastern or Tulane or the University of Miami in Florida. So there are a lot of restrictions when you apply restrictive early action. All right, one more question. What are do's and don'ts for the COVID section on Common App? So I mentioned a couple things. So the do's, it's not just about not being able to go to a national competition or not being able to have a special internship that matches up perfectly with what you want to major in. That section really should be about students who have been negatively impacted, significantly impacted by COVID-19. So for example, they got COVID-19, their parents, someone very close to them, maybe mom or dad lost their job, maybe they weren't able to have any interaction or leave their house because someone in their family is sick and they can't take that risk. So those are the primary reasons to put something in that COVID-19 section. But also you could list if you weren't able to go to a national competition or a state tournament, or if you've missed an opportunity in the summertime. But anything positive that you've done, again, I'd want you to list that in the activities list. And anything that you did before COVID-19 and you're hoping to continue doing this year, you can also list that in the activities list. So those are some do's and don'ts for the COVID section. And on that note, we've got to wrap up, but I hope that you will join me back here again. I try to do a Facebook Live every single month, but also I try to do Instagram Lives every Friday afternoon. But I'll just mention, I'm not going to be able to do one tomorrow afternoon, but almost every other Friday afternoon, you can catch me on Instagram Live. My handle is @SarahHarborsen. So I look forward to seeing you back here again in about a month, and I wish all of those students a great start to the school year. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.